We invite you to worship with us with an open mind and an open heart. As we enter into sacred time, created by our presence and shared intent, I invite you to get comfortable, turn down your phones or other distracting devices, make a conscious decision to set aside for this 1 hour the self-protective walls we all keep around our heart and our thoughts. Let us remember and explore together what has drawn us to this faith, or learn what this faith is about, and relax. Let the stresses of the outside world slip away as together we focus on this time together. And together we breathe. Although we are now a community connected largely by electronic means, one day we will be together again. Yet even now, we are those seekers with the yearnings to learn, to understand, to make the world a better place, and with the same desire for fellowship. And so we are here seeking that living, interconnected web of which we are a part. Let go of the anxiety, the fears, the expectations of your own or others' making, and join us in this hour of beloved community. And so together we breathe. Our opening hymn this morning is Blue Boat Home. Please rise in spirit and join us. And because we are Zooming this, nobody will know if you sing off key. For our call to worship, please read with me one of our Unitarian Universalist covenantal poems. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to live in harmony with all the living creatures and plants of the earth. This do we affirm. Today, Alec Peck will be our speaker, and the title of his talk is Yahweh and the Goddess Earth. He said, we will explore 2 of the 6 UU sources, Jewish and Christian teachings and earth-centered traditions, and their relationship to each other. We often underestimate the power of pagan readings to Judeo-Christian myths and misunderstand the cruel behavior of Yahweh. What do the stories of the Torah tell us about the nature of how we and the world work? What is our place between the goddess earth and the father sky, between primal yin and divine yang? Alec Peck has been a practicing UU for over 22 years and has a deep passion for the intellectual and spiritual challenges which arise from exploring the 6 sources of our living tradition. Alex was raised in a UU church, chosen by his father, who was a Quaker, and his mother, who was raised Jewish, but human atheist in praxis. In addition to his heritage, he has a personal interest in Taoism and recently spent 2 years studying natural science at Creighton University, a Jesuit institution. Alex is serving as your volunteer music director here at UUCR while completing his PhD in particle physics at UC Riverside. For those who are part of this live Zoom, Alex said he will be available for a short period of question and answers at the end of the service, and will also join us at chat time, which begins at 11:30. There are a few announcements we would like to share. During the service, we will mention several website and email addresses and phone numbers. At the end of the service, we will leave the slide up with all this information, so you don't need to copy things down right now. But for those needing the information by auditory means, they will be announced verbally during the service. Chat time provides an opportunity to spend an hour talking among ourselves, usually beginning with the service, then wandering on to other topics. It's held on Zoom at 11:30, but to participate, you need a separate Zoom invitation. Actually, you don't. That just changed, I understand. So you will use the same Zoom invitation that you use to access this service, which is correct on our website. So if you have not received an invitation by email, go to our website at uuchurchofriverside.org for the Zoom chat time registration, which is the same as joining for the service. On the first Sunday of each month, we will share with you the joys and concerns that we have received throughout the month. Be sure to email or text your joys and concerns throughout the month as they happen and you're thinking about them to Dinah Rowe, our Caring Network Coordinator. Her email is ramblinrose22@yahoo.com, or you can call or text her at 909-645-2885. Unitarian Universalists around the country are organizing for the Week of Action, October 21st through 27th. It's the big final get out the vote push, and they need your help. They are focusing on Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Michigan, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Texas, Virginia, and Wisconsin. The goals of the phone calls are basically answering questions about the changing election details in the different states and encouraging people to vote. For more information, go to uuthevote.org or go to our website. The crises of 2020 demand our response to the central question of our time: how shall we live together? As people of faith and values, our response calls for a new moral vision, a California where everyone, no matter our race or place, can truly belong and thrive. We also believe in mercy, second chances, and healing. Pledge to vote for these values in November. It's easy to make that pledge. On your cell, text SCF ICUC to 40649 to find out how. For the most current and reliable information on the COVID-19 virus in our area, go to the website for your county public health department or the state of California. You can find information and links on our website. Riverside County has recently moved into Tier 2 of the governor's 4-tier steps toward reopening. That allows churches to reopen with accommodations. Our church leaders are discussing plans toward that eventuality, but will err on the side of safety, as health departments recommend. So we will keep you updated on Sunday announcements and on the website. Dinah Rowe has resumed the monthly UUCR newsletter again. It will be out the first of every month. If you have something you'd like covered or want to write for it, let Dinah know at ramblinrose22@yahoo.com or call or text her at 909-645-2885. The church and some members and friends of UUCR have received several fraudulent emails asking for help. As an example, we received one purporting to be from Lee, our board president. The return email was almost, but not exactly like his. Please do not respond to any email asking for help, money, or gifts. You can contact the individual directly by phone, and please contact the church office for more information. If you have unknowingly responded and sent them something, please let us know immediately. We have 2 lightings of sacred flames. The first is the occupied Indigenous Peoples Remembrance Candle, and the second is the lighting of our own chalice, the symbol of our faith. Let us acknowledge that we walk upon the traditional territories of the Maranga, the original people of this land, who continue to cry out for justice and self-determination. In honor of the Maranga, we, the Universalist Unitarian Church of Riverside, light this sacred flame as the stewards of this sacred and holy place. We are blessed with a space and opportunity to strive to live out our common principles, to bring justice, equity, and compassion into our daily lives, to resist all that threatens the earth and her people, and to live out our dream of a world community of peace, liberty, and justice for all. Let these thoughts carry us forth as we journey and worship together. Our chalice lighting this morning is For the Web of Life by Paul Sprecher. We light this chalice for the web of life which sustains us, for the sacred circle of life in which we have our being, for earth, the sky above and below, and for our Mother Earth and for the mystery. Our next hymn is Spirit of Life. Please rise in spirit and join us. And now Dinah Rowe, our church treasurer, will speak to us about sharing our treasure.
Good morning. This portion of our service is how we fund all that we do to minister to and care for our congregation and our beloved historic church, and to ensure that when we are able to safely reopen again, we will be here to welcome you all back again. A reminder that even though the church is not allowed to reopen at this time, the church expenses continue. Just a few of these expenses, which are ongoing, are the utilities, insurance, and the security service. Our administrator, Robert, pays the bills and answers inquiries to the church, plus other administrative duties as required. Our accountant, Laura, has pointed out that the church income is down, so please make sure your pledge is current. You can mail your pledge and donations to the church office, and again, please, no cash. Our church office is shown here and will be available later in the program. Stater Brothers and script cards for your grocery shopping pleasure also earns the church a percentage. Please contact me or the church office to purchase Stater's cards. My email address will be shown later, and the church office email is admin@uuchurchofriverside.org. For those of you who have purchased Amazon gift cards, another way to help is when making purchases through Amazon, go to smile.amazon.com. Be sure to have the smile and choose Universalist Unitarian Church as your charity. We receive 0.5% of your qualifying purchases, and by using Amazon script card, we receive a percentage from both. I will be taking orders for script cards later again as the holidays approach. Gift cards make good gifts to put in your holiday cards. Please donate as the Spirit moves you by whatever method works best for you. Thank you for your generosity, and to those who give of their time and their talent, thank you for your generous care and attention. Our next hymn is From You I Receive. Please rise again in spirit and join us.
From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, from this we live. From you I receive.
Our contemplative reading this morning is Speaking the Language of the Living Tradition by Reverend Elizabeth Ketchum. I grew up as the heavily committed eldest child of an American Baptist minister in the 50s. Committed, that is, to self-preservation, staying out of trouble with our small town and my family, and having fun within the safe parameters, namely church activities. I never felt particularly committed to doctrine, never totally bought the idea of virgin birth or resurrection or miracles or Trinity or other supernatural religious concepts, though I never openly admitted this either. It seemed to me that it didn't matter much whether these things really happened or not. Wasn't the whole point of Christianity the teachings of Jesus? Wasn't that the miracle? So I faked it a bit. Talked a good game, gave the impression of a devout young woman, all because I loved my parents and siblings dearly, and they seemed to believe this stuff. I never revealed to them my own questions because I didn't want to be separated from my family. I could see that they were really devoted to the teachings of Jesus, not just the trappings, and that was the important thing to me. What this created in my life was an interesting blend of preferences and problems. I avoided language which talked about saving souls or conversion or bloody sacrifice or subservience, ideas which didn't really seem to resonate with the teachings of Jesus. During a stint as an American Baptist home missionary in Denver, I began to feel strongly that saving souls meant providing after-school activities for kids, a food bank, optometric services, job opportunities, friendships, and acceptance. Conversion for me wasn't a blinding experience on the road to Damascus, but a gradual understanding of what I believed and was committed to, and was willing to commit to. Bloody sacrifice seemed as senseless as the war in Vietnam, which was itself a bloody sacrifice of young men, some of them my friends. Subservience? Well, resentment by the subservient seemed to be its outcome. As Unitarian Universalist, first a layperson and now a minister, I often choose metaphors to express my ideas of God. I love Brian Wren's hymn, Bring Many Names, in singing the living tradition with its loving metaphors. God as mother, father, aging, young, living being. But I don't only use human metaphors for God. For me, God is cosmos, nature, universe, power beyond human power. For me, Trinity is too few manifestations of the divine. I keep thinking there's a sermon title in there somewhere. 3 is too few. Attending a United Methodist seminary, Ilith in Denver, gave me a chance to improve my skills at translating, for I had decided by then that a Unitarian Universalist needs to be religiously bilingual, able to speak religious language freely, understanding others whose dialect and language is somewhat different, accepting of differences, not needing to hear only UUEs. If we are a pluralistic faith, we need to be pluralistic in our understandings and acceptances and capabilities. I remember when my best childhood friend told me that she used to think God's name was Andy because of the old hymn we often sang in church. Andy walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own. And small children have been known to intone, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. I like that. My buddy Andy shares his garden with me, the garden of the universe, of Woodbey Island, of cats and eagles and flowers and trees. Though my Father who art in heaven is named Merit, it's okay if someone else's is Howard. Now let us pause for a moment of silence. And now I have the pleasure of introducing Alec Peck. Alec is an active member of our worship committee, and he is responsible for the recent recording of our hymns. Alec?
Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you very much. And thank you, Martha, for reminding us happy National Coming Out Day. So, today I'd like to talk about 2 of our 6 sources of the living tradition, I'll be talking about a story from Judeo-Christian teachings and about the theological interpretations of earth-centered traditions. I don't have any actionable takeaways or even advice for your life. I don't intend to convince you that any particular interpretation is valuable or true, but I do find them interesting. And I believe that we need to understand the six sources in order to understand UUism. So my goal here is just to provide some intellectual musings about a few of these spiritual practices which go into our shared history. I'll mostly be talking about a Jewish creation myth, which most of you will be quite familiar with, and Indo-European paganism. But I'll also mention elements of Taoism. I've partially chosen this eclectic collection of spiritualities to talk about because of my personal experiences with them, and I think my perspective allows me to see some intriguing parallels between them. Indeed, I believe we all hold some part of the truth, and each of the world's religions in some way captures some projection of the spiritual universe. I wanted to present this sermon because I heard an interpretation of the well-known myth of the Garden of Eden which tickled my brain. This myth in particular is obviously very Judeo-Christian. I mean, it's their answer to how and why this all began, and it obviously doesn't hold a lot of literal truth. Even models which attempt to map parallels between the events of Genesis and the evidence of observational astronomy are fairly unconvincing, even with a very figurative interpretation. Now, as I was writing these opening paragraphs, I found myself stopped by a single question. Why should you even care? Many UUs don't believe in God, and certainly most UUs don't believe in the Christian God, so why should we care to interpret Judeo-Christian myths? Christians interpret their mythology to attempt to learn something about God, so what is the use in this exercise for UUs? I claim that we can use other sources of the living tradition to interpret Judeo-Christian myths, and if you're willing to accept that a pagan or Taoist interpretation is at least valid, then I think I can also offer you a reason why you might care. Under the humanist lens, interpreting myths does not tell you about God, but about humans. Regardless of what might have inspired them, the Torah was written down by a human, translated by a human, and understood by humans. Therefore, to understand mythology is to understand humanity. Ideas about the source of the physical world and of morality reflect some aspect of the human psyche. It can help us to understand what it means to be human, something that seems to be getting harder every day for many. Under the pagan lens, to understand mythology is to understand the natural world. The myths of morality and creation were written to explain the world we experience. Everything we know comes from our experiences of the natural world, and myths are our attempt to connect our lived experiences to the physical world we share. Of course, this exchange works both ways. Just as earth-centered traditions can give us insight into monotheistic, God-centered traditions, so can Judeo-Christian lenses give us insight into earth-centered spiritualities. So even if you don't care to get any insight into the mind of Jews, you can still get something out of this cross-interpretation between UU sources. I think it's natural for UUs to hybridize many elements of the six sources to create their own hodgepodge of ideologies, and so I think it's pretty natural for UUs to come to this conclusion. As I mentioned in the introduction, I spent the last couple years at a Jesuit university, and that means that my professors were physicists, but also had a deep passion for Christian theology. And that means that I got to hear my professors speak occasionally about theological topics at the weekly seminar. My classical mechanics professor was telling a personal anecdote about how he was surprised to feel a sense of holiness or some sense of God's presence while out in nature. To which I, a bit cynically, thought this could only be surprising to a Catholic for whom God can only be contacted through the church. My mother was raised in a form of religion that I would call technically Jewish. I'm not sure if my grandpa Dave has ever been in a synagogue in my lifetime, and if he has, it's definitely not as often as we've gotten him into a UU church. I'm fairly certain Grandpa Dave doesn't believe in Yahweh, nor does he really believe in any conventional form of heaven, if any. Despite this, he does seem to believe in the power of curses. Curses placed on the land where atrocities had occurred. Curses which can be placed upon families for their sins. A few years ago I might have characterized him firmly as a humanist, but these superstitious beliefs fall more in line with paganism. These themes and the non-theistic, mystical parts of Judaism were what resonated with him. There's actually a pretty significant overlap between the Jewish idea of Yahweh and the tangible forces of nature, especially when compared to the Christian idea of God. Yahweh is a local God among many, the God of the Jews, who can exist separately from the Greek pantheon or from the goddess earth and father sky. Jewish God is a local force and inherently connected to the land. There's a physical place that is Yahweh, and place and physical places can be made holy. Yahweh is seen as part of the sands of Israel, which is what makes the land holy and worth fighting holy war over for centuries, all the way up to today with the Palestinians. But I'd like to keep this idea of Yahweh being like a force of nature in mind as we talk about Adam and Eve. Just as we can take a valid humanist reading, which assumes that the stories of the Torah tell us something about ourselves, we can also take a pagan reading, which assumes that these stories tell us something about how nature works. I'll be reading a script written by Henry, a man who makes video essays who consulted Rabbi Serkman in a video titled God is Weird, a close look at Adam and Eve. You can find the video with accompanying visuals on YouTube if you're interested. So here is God is Weird, a close look at Adam and Eve. So to start off, this is the most common way of the story that Adam and Eve is told, the way that is particularly popular in the West. First, Yahweh created Adam. Then, sooner after that, he created Eve to keep this king company. God told Adam that he could eat from any tree in the Garden of Eden except for one, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which God commanded them they should not eat from. But then, a little while later, a serpent came over to Eve and was like, "Don't even worry about it, that fruit's super good. Just eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil." And so she ate from it, and she got her husband to eat from it too. And when Yahweh found out about their disobedience, God got super mad, punished the couple, and forced them out of Eden, forced them to feel pain, to die, to have trouble finding food to eat, etc. Now, my goal is certainly not meant to make people question their faith or whatever, but I do want to push back on one of the most basic elements of this interpretation. It's a claim that the story is about Yahweh punishing Adam and Eve for acting against God's wishes. It's a reading which doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and that's for a few major reasons. For one, pay attention to what Yahweh actually says to Adam about the apple of the knowledge of good and evil. And yes, I know it's not technically an apple, but I'm extremely mercenary, and I will be calling it an apple because it's easy and familiar. So this is what the Torah says. "And the Lord said to the man, 'You are free to eat the apple from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die.'" Now, looking at this, sure, what God does here is referred to as a command, but it doesn't seem like the kind of command that you'd punish someone for breaking. Imagine a father telling his daughter, "You can do a lot of things in this house, but you can't touch fire. If you do, you'll certainly be burnt." Now, yes, the father here is prohibiting fire poking. He doesn't want his kid to do it, but it's more like a warning than a command, right? And if the kid does touch the flame, it doesn't seem likely that the dad would punish her over it. After all, she was already burned, and that was the main outcome he was trying to avoid in the first place. And this is how I read Yahweh here, as an entity that's warning Adam that he shouldn't eat the apple because eating the apple will harm him. And when he does eat the apple, well, he does eventually die, in the same way that getting burnt is a consequence of touching fire, hurting or dying is a consequence of eating the apple. But there's another, maybe more important point here. It's unclear exactly what this apple does to the people who eat it. But if we take the name of the fruit even slightly literally, you'd think that the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil would, make people aware of good and evil. Therefore, before Adam and Eve ate the apple, they didn't have that knowledge. For that reason, it seems extremely odd for me to punish Adam and Eve for their apple eating. After all, presumably they had no way to know that presumably they had no idea that they were supposed to not do that in a moral sense. They had no idea that obeying Yahweh was the ethical thing to do. And looking at these observations, I think we have to ask a question. If Yahweh was simply punishing Adam and Eve for disobeying God, what exactly does this myth explain? What would the point of it be? Henry is an atheist, and when he reads this text, he does so with the assumption that this was something that people came up with in order to explain the world around them in some way. Primarily, this story seems to be an attempt to explain why there is suffering in the world, why life is painful and short and taxing. But if Yahweh was punishing us, even though what God said reads more like a warning than a demand, and even though the people God was talking to had no understanding of morality, then God would just be a terrible, arbitrary weirdo who harmed people under unfair circumstances. And what does that tell us about why we suffer? What does that add to our understanding? Nothing. It just says that we suffer because we do, because someone randomly decided that we should. Cool. Interesting. For these reasons, I have to assume that if there is to be any thematic value in this story, it comes from the understanding that Yahweh did not wish us poorly when he kicked us out of Eden. That when God kicked us out, he kind of had to. And if we want to ask why God may have had to, we can only imagine one real explanation. That from the perspective of Genesis, an understanding of right and wrong is not exclusively an intellectual thing, an abstract concept like algebra or logic or something like that. Rather, having an ethical mind requires having a world where those ethics matter, where people can experience terrible things, where actions have severe and important consequences, where you understand why inflicting harm is bad because you know what it is to be harmed. Why did Adam and Eve have to leave the Garden of Eden after they ate the apple? Well, I think it's because if they had stayed, the apple would not do what it purports to do, give people morals. But this idea leaves us with a puzzle, one that really confuses and motivated Henry to make his video in the first place. So, okay, let's just say that this interpretation is right and that according to Genesis, we must know suffering if we are to be moral creatures. That's kind of cool and interesting, but it does leave us with the question. Why then doesn't Yahweh have to suffer in this way? Let's rewind. On the first page of Genesis, we learn that Yahweh created man in God's own image, or likeness, or shadow. And that's interesting because it seems like there could be nothing that's further from the truth. Sure, we may or may not look like God in a literal sense, but there's so many ways in which we could not be more different. I don't know if the God of Genesis is omniscient or omnipotent. It's a bit of a controversial subject among Jews, and it's not like God just comes right out and says God is. But God certainly knows a lot and has orders of magnitude more power than any human has. God created the entire universe, after all. What's more, I think we can safely infer a few things about God, even if we can't say them for sure. Like, it's hard to imagine that Yahweh, this creature that pre-existed everything, would eventually die in the way humans die. It's hard to imagine that God would have to go around trying to find food to survive. And as far as physical pain is concerned, well, it's hard to imagine God getting a bruise or cut, that would be kind of odd given God's description here. So I don't know if Yahweh suffers in one way or another. It's difficult to say for sure. Some say that Yahweh suffers when humans suffer, and Christians believe that God suffered on the cross for our sins. But in both of these cases, Yahweh only experiences suffering through humans. And regardless, it seems clear that whatever God experiences isn't anything like what happened to Adam and Eve after they ate the apple. If we are to believe that the harm that came to the couple was necessary to make them moral entities, then what the hell is up with God? How did God get away without having to do any of that stuff? And the answer to this question is as obvious as it is unexpected. From the perspective of Genesis, Yahweh simply isn't moral, at least not moral in the way people are. God exists outside of the world, doesn't understand harm because God can't truly experience it. And yes, when Adam takes a bite of the apple, God says, "And the man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil." But maybe that's all God knows, the abstract difference between two utterly meaningless concepts. Maybe none of it is truly real to God. Now, I understand the idea that Yahweh is not a moral entity is probably counterintuitive, or even potentially sacrilegious to some. I mean, religious people often believe that God is the most ethical being that could possibly ever be, the figure with the ultimate right to judge human actions. But personally, I find this reading really helpful and almost cathartic. I talked before about how fundamentally different God and humans are, and those differences have always presented me with a bit of a challenge within this myth of our creation. Within this myth of our creation, Yahweh is a tremendously powerful, eternal being who feels no pain and decides to make people who are so weak, so finite, so stupid, so tortured. Why? What is the purpose of us when Yahweh is better in every way? What could God possibly get out of creating us? And through this interpretation, we at least get some idea of what the answer to that question could be. God created us because there's one thing we can do that God can't. Be good. Be moral agents who are accountable to each other in ways that matter. In the final lines of the story, after Yahweh realizes that Adam and Eve have eaten the apple and gained its knowledge, God says this, He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever. And then, as the couple walks away, Yahweh places a flaming sword in front of the tree of life to prevent their returning to it. Looking at this final line, I always feel a temptation to think of Yahweh as selfish. And to be pretty clear, I think that interpretation is pretty fair. Why does God get to eat both fruits, live forever, and know good from evil? God to us, particularly of Genesis, seems particularly awful, doesn't he? God knocks down our towers, murders us, floods the entire earth because God didn't like God's own creations. And we can read this as just another example of that awfulness, God forcing us to suffer in a way that God never has to. But I don't know if that's the whole story. After all, Yahweh is the sort of being who would flood the earth, murder us, knock our towers down. And in this moment, God had a choice: to allow us to eat from the fruit of life and be like that, be gods, or to have us be people. And maybe Yahweh chose the latter because God knew that at some level we could be better than gods. That's the end of Henry's script, but I think there's still more we can draw from taking an explicitly pagan reading of this story. In the story, we see that Yahweh is amoral, or in some way outside of morality. This, in many ways, reflects our experience of nature, the food cycle, the coming and going of species, the incredibly unlikely conditions required to form intelligent life also seem to behave incredibly amorally. As Lee said in our chat time a few weeks ago, our sense of morals are derived from nature, and where else but from nature could they have come from? Morality springing from an amoral source is equally mystifying regardless of whether you interpret its origin as from nature or from God. Taoism is also in many ways about our relationship to the earth. Most of you will be familiar with the yin-yang symbol featuring white and black squirrels balancing each other. The dark section represents yin, which is our ground connection to the earth and the influences of our primal nature, and the light is yang, which I like to think of as our connection to the intellectual, abstract realm, to reason and mysticism, but it's also symbolic of our connection to the heavens, or holiness. Taiji is about balancing yin and yang in our core, the Dan Shen, within and in our place, the human place, being in the middle with access to both worlds. The parallels to Mother Earth and Father Sky are abundant. In Taoism, we balance yin and yang in our physical and spiritual center, and in paganism, we have the elements of nature infused within us. Physics tells me that these spiritualities can both describe the same thing, not in the sense of two equally bad theories, but in that they each describe projections of the same idea, which can be completely consistent, like two shadows of a single object, each different, but completely consistent with this object of religious truth. Thank you.
Thank you, Alec. Our closing hymn is Woyaya. Please rise in spirit and join us.
We are going, heaven knows where we are going, but we know within. We are going, heaven knows where we are going,
For our benediction, please close your eyes and reach out to each other in your thoughts. Feel the connection between us, the interconnected web, joining us as a community, a church family. Our benediction is To Make Ready for the Coming Day by Bill Hamilton Hallway. If I were to wish you peace, it would not be for long. It would be peace to rest, to reflect, to make ready for the coming day. That full force of your creativity and love might be released and shared. I do wish you peace. Amen, shalom, and blessed be.
Now you can say hello.
Hello. Thank you. That was very nice, Alec.
Thank you, Alec. That was things I had not considered. I really liked hearing what you had to say.
Very much.
Oh. No.
I had a question and a comment.
Lee, yes, I see your mouth. Oh, there you are. Yes, you have a comment.
Well, and a question. Well, first comment. Thanks for the very interesting interpretation. Sharing Henry's work with us. You'll have us chasing Henry to see who Henry is, but
Big Joel. I didn't know if it felt weird to say that it was written by someone named Big Joel. I don't know why he chose that name, but again, if you want to see his girlfriend drew some really cute artwork as he reads a script. So if you want to see some cute art that accompanies those words, I think you can find that online.
Okay, excellent. Well, mythologists, I mean, obviously in the Tanakh, the what Christians call the Old Testament, there are about 10 different creation myths, right? 2 of them in Genesis, and of course you picked on the second one, which is the one that is generally understood to just be a continuation of the first one, even though they're really exceedingly different accounts, right?
For context, the first one you're referring to, the 7th day in which God creates the earth, yes.
The 6 days, and then the prologue, and then the 7th day as an epilogue. Yeah, exactly. There have been those who have compared the tree of knowledge, good and evil, and all of that. Obviously, the figures in the second one are generic, right? They aren't names, right? Ha Adam just means the man, right? It's a definite article right there, and so forth. And Ava, Chava, So, but people have noticed that what makes man human, and by man I mean humankind, human, right? Is knowledge, is a moral knowledge of good and evil. All right. Right. So it's very similar to the Prometheus myth of the discovery of fire, which is another thing that has often been linked with humans, right? And as in many other mythologies, the gods take offense at humans becoming moral, right? For some reason.
The god who gave Prometheus fire, his punishment was that his
Right. And with Yahweh, it's the creatures that get punished, not the deity that gets punished, So, but the idea that our becoming human is what is so enigmatic, and so this issue isn't really come up. Well, I mean, it comes up later on in Plato's dialogues, in the dialogue with Euthyphro, where the young man comes to Socrates, right, and says, "Are the gods moral because they're gods, or must they follow a higher rule of morality?" And this illustrates that, because all three of the god religions, you know, the binding of Yitzhak or the binding of Ismail, or however you interpret that, through which Judaism, Christianity, and Islam arose, you actually have the deity commanding an immoral act, but it becomes moral, quote unquote, you know, because God said it. And obviously the three god religions came down on the wrong side of Euthyphro's dialogue, it seems to me. And we've been living with the consequences ever since, as fundamentalists in all three religions can show us by their actions over the centuries, you know. What do you think?
I mentioned the story of Euthyphro, which is not an easy name to say, at one of our conferences at the physics department. We have a weekend together and we have some Jesuit priests, and we spend most of the Saturday talking about spiritual topics of various natures. And my understanding of the story of Euthyphro, I used to be good at saying this, Euthyphro, is that he's encountered, I believe it's Plato who's encountered Euthyphro on his way to court, who is going to prosecute his own father for some crime. And to which the question is, how do you know what you're doing is right? You're sure, even if your father committed this crime, how do you know that this crime is bad enough that it is the right thing to do to prosecute your own father for it? And even if the answer is some form of God, which says that things can or aren't arbitrary, you just kick the can down the road a little bit to how did the gods decide that those things were moral or amoral. They either had a reason, which means that they obey some higher law, or they didn't have a reason, which means that all morals are arbitrary. And then you're kind of back at square one again.
Or you have what the Christian apologist does with this, William Lane Craig, right, who also opines on matters physical and cosmological to all of our detriment, I think. But he talks about the divine command theory of morality, which he thinks is the only form of morality there is. Quite self-refuting, but nevertheless he holds to it, and he comes down squarely on the gods are right because they're gods side of the Euthyphro dilemma, which I'm afraid is the way Yahweh and his descendants come down as well. Yes, and I'm thinking also about what we've been saying about these. We've mentioned now a couple Greek mythologies. It seems like in many of these cases, we still end up back at this paradox of we have to derive morals somehow from this amoral source, especially when people talk about Christianity, they often say, well, look, there's this paradox that you can easily make by looking at these Christian ideas, to which Christians say, yeah, isn't that interesting? When you don't think that those paradoxes are a problem. Right. Thank you.
One of the reasons why I love science fiction is it, particularly in this realm, there are many different authors who pose a lot of different possibilities for what a god creature might be. And in the original Star Trek series, they dealt with this quite a few times. Yeah. And I remember this one where, and I can't remember the details right this minute, but there was this god critter that was tinkering with this humanoid race and started getting really interfering, and the humanoid race on this planet. We're having all kinds of problems. You know, what do we have to do now to please this God? And finally, near the end of the program, the parents of this godling come and, oh, are you interfering with those people again? You need to stop that, and take him off to, you know, and he ends up, he's just a young kid. But compared to these people that are about, you know, on this planet, he's so much more advanced in evolution that they consider him a god. So, yeah.
As a comment, I see a hand.
Good.
That's how.
But you can't unmute because you can only unmute yourself once. Adam, can we get an unmute? Grace?
Thank you. What you're referring to is one of my favorite original series episodes. It's the Squire of Gothos, and that's Trelane, who is later thought of as maybe a Q or not. But I love that. I love how he's just messing with all of these people's lives because he thinks he has, like, because he does have power over them, but he doesn't have any, like, control of that power. Like, he's like, okay, I can do all of these things because I want to, but he doesn't have that morality, that, like, idea of, okay, this is maybe right and this is wrong and this is going to hurt people and this isn't, and this is going to help people and this isn't. So I'm really glad you brought that up because I was thinking about it too, but I wouldn't want to be the only one.
So many years, fragments were coming back.
Yeah, that's great. I love that one.
That's not the episode where they go to the planet and the Greek gods are there?
That's a different one. That's the Apollo one, isn't it?
Yeah, the Apollo one.
Oh, that's such a good episode.
With this issue and several of them.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Grace.
So I just wanted to say what the conversation between Lee and Alec reminded me of is when the kids ask their parents why, and the parents go, because I said so. And, you know, the important thing is the parents have to know what they are saying, what they are telling the kids to do. And I think there is, again, where ethics and morals come in.
Yeah. Linda, did you have your hand as well?
Yeah, I read a similar book by Greeley, Andrew Greeley, the priest, called The God Game, where this gentleman found himself in the middle of a computer game that the people started reacting to him based on what he told them to do. It was an interesting kind of similarity to that, where he found himself, he wanted to help the people, but he found himself by his choices actually not helping them, which was an interesting idea as well, that as God, you can't really know your people and the future, and at least in this, as far as the game went, you couldn't really actually make necessarily the right choices. So that was an interesting book too.
Absolutely. Thank you, Linda. Some of these comments remind me of there was a study that came out recently investigating the beliefs of rich philanthropists, and it turns out that there tends to be a very large disconnect between the problems, how they think they're addressing the problems, and what the sources of those problems actually are. Even if they are very good philanthropists, they still don't understand what exactly they can do to help. Bill Gates was, the Gates Foundation was part of this as the example.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda. Grace, you want to say something?
Grace has something.
I have a question, Alex. So when you said Bill Gates, so what was the whole?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I trailed off there. They were saying that you can, if you look at something like the Gates Foundation, they put a lot of money into addressing specific issues. One in particular that I know about is they target the spread of malaria, and in terms of when you talk to the people who are in charge of the decision making of these things, they tend to not be people who are personally affected by these issues. They tend to be people who are in a very rich social class and therefore have a very abstract view of these issues, similar to this idea that maybe God or Yahweh only has this abstract idea of good and evil. It's not something that you really feel in that way. And so it reminds me in some ways of this idea of people who act philanthropically, but they do so at this very distanced perspective. Lee has a finger up.
Just an add-on thought there. One of the things that seemed to me, and I think many people to characterize morality, is that it must be universal. If it's not universal, it's not moral. And that's one of the problems that comes with the so-called Abrahamic religions, is that they always have an in-group morality and then an out-group morality, those that are within the, and therefore it's not really a morality if it's not a universal morality that applies equally across the board. You know, you go down through the history, the long and varied histories of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, you find this constant tension between the natural inclinations to be moral to everyone, and then the recognition that, well, I'm actually only supposed to have a certain level of morality for the in-group, and another discriminatory type for the out-group. And that's, I think that's perhaps one of those, in addition to some of the arbitrariness and whatever, is one of the big critiques of that particular strains of morality, which you don't find in the same way in some of the indigenous and pagan moralities. You don't find them, that kind of double standards or that kind of in-group morality.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll highlight what said in the chat, that the short answer of how often we apply our own moralities to other cultures when we judge them. Definitely harking back to Star Trek, if we can imagine an entirely different planet where what we think of as moral could be completely arbitrary to a planet that follows very different rules for how their life works, and even more so, it going to this in-group and out-group thing. We have to remember that we're always tainted by our own lens of, we have to make any of these moral judgments, we have to establish some kind of moral framework, and as we've talked about in this discussion, you can't really make any kind of moral judgment outside of a moral framework.
It's true.
I don't know if I have any other thoughts to add, if there are no other discussions that people want to have.
Okay, see you at chat time. We can carry this on there for those who want to.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, and everybody who registered for chat time should have got a link, but it's the same link you used to join here. You can stay on here, or you can leave and come back. It's up to you, but we'll be back here at 11:30 for chat time.
Okay, thanks, Adam.